Welcome to Harness's CI/CD Dev Days. This is our first one of the new year, so Happy New Year to everyone. My name is Tom Casari. I'm on our sales engineering team here at Harness. I've been here for about 3 years. I started my career in development, so I was an application developer, probably much like many folks on the webinar today. And after I left application development over the past 20 years, I've been automating all of the things, not always in CI/CD, not always in the dev space, but automation is my passion. And when Harness gave me an opportunity to come back into that dev space and apply automation into that CI/CD or the SDLC process, it was an opportunity I couldn't refuse. So I've been here again for 3 years. I'm based out of Reston, Virginia. I think we have probably folks from all over the country and possibly all over the world joining here. So great to see everyone. If anyone wants to, if whoever's maybe furthest away can type in the chat and let us know where you're joining from, that'd be pretty awesome. Now, before we get into the hands-on lab for the Dev Days, let me give you a quick overview into Harness. Harness was actually started back in 2017, founded by our founder, Jyoti Bansal, in San Francisco. We are in the leader quadrant, in the Magic Quadrant for DevOps platforms. Gartner just released their first one ever a few months back, and we're proud to be in that leader quadrant. We have 900 plus enterprise customers executing tens of millions of pipelines annually. And you can see kind of a who's who of customers that we have listed down below. Now, when we started in 2017, Harness was just a continuous delivery product. That was the only thing we were doing. That was what our founder, he had challenges in his previous organization or previous company that he founded. And his mission was to solve the challenges around delivering software more quickly, more reliably. And so Harness started off as a continuous delivery solution. But over the years, we've added a number of different capabilities into our platform. This actually doesn't show us everything that we do because we're constantly adding new things. I don't have an updated slide just yet that shows some of the newer capabilities, things such as our cloud developer environments and database DevOps. There's a number of new capabilities that have come out that are not on this list just yet. However, even the old list is very impressive. So think about Harness being able to manage everything from code all the way into production. So these different capabilities that we have on the screen here are going to be an integral part of all of those. The Harness platform is modular, which means you don't have to take everything all at once. You don't have to purchase everything all at once. What we typically do with customers is we look for, what is the problem that we're looking to solve? What is the pain that has that customer coming to look for a solution? And we focus it on just that. So we have customers who will start with just one capability. Could be just continuous delivery, could be feature management, could be internal developer portal. And then we have other customers who will come and say, hey, there's a number of things I'm looking to do, and maybe end up getting a package of different modules, as you see on the screen here. So that's all I wanted to talk about at a high level on Harness. We're not going to spend much time going through slides and stuff like that. The real purpose of our Dev Days here is to get everyone hands-on into the Harness product. Now, the way we're going to do that is by using a platform called Instruct. Some of you may be familiar with that platform. If not, I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to share information here in the chat so everyone else can access this as well. So give me 1 second here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to grab the link that everyone needs to access Instruct and share it in the chat. And what I'll do is I'll bring it up myself and show you kind of how we go through it, explain it before everyone jumps in and starts working on the various labs. Great, so I've shared that link in the chat session. Everyone should be able to click on that link. Now, I'm going to show you what that looks like when I click on the link. Let me bring up my screen. Okay, Rudy says he is not seeing the link. I'm sorry, it is, I have to change the setting here for chat. I apologize. Let's try that one more time. Rudy, Helgi, okay, there we go, perfect. Thanks for chiming in and letting me know I didn't do that one correctly, so I appreciate that. All right, so if everyone can see my screen again, I'm going to follow along with you throughout this. I'll be here, of course, to give you a hand as we go through the different labs and all that. But the Instruct platform, what we've done here is giving you a link so everyone can come into the Instruct platform. And what you'll be able to do is to enter your first name, last name, your email address, mine in here, spell. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do a different one because that one's already taken. And it's going to say we have one piece of content that we have access to. Now, before you guys start, let me go ahead and start this up. And what we're going to see here is some of the different capabilities that we're going to walk through as part of the hands-on lab today. So our goal today is to walk through a few key capabilities. It includes continuous integration, harnesses continuous integration, which we've done some testing on. It has a number of different capabilities to reduce the build, the test, the deploy times, things like that. And we've done some testing. There's white papers and case studies and blogs out there on Harness that some of the world's biggest open source projects you can build 4 times faster. I think that number is actually closer probably to 6 or 7 times faster with some of the capabilities we've released recently than other systems. So we're able to, again, greatly improve those build times. Continuous delivery. We're not going to be focusing on the GitOps side today, but we're going to be working on fully automated pipelines to deliver our application into our development or production environment. And then security test orchestration, which is the ability for us to shift left and orchestrate all of our security scans and policies within the pipeline. This has benefits for both the application developers and the SecOps team. They all have different desires within that pipeline. This kind of helps bring everyone together and gives everyone the best of breed experience for what they're looking for. Now, when you go ahead and click the start button, some of you may have already done that and some of you may not, but if you haven't, go ahead and click the start button. What this is doing is it's building in the background a unique environment for you to run through the labs. As you can see here, mine's building up right now as well. My hamsters are at peak velocity and they're waking them up right now. But what this will do, the Instruct platform will set up an environment where each one of us will be able to walk through these labs. So we'll give it a couple minutes for everyone to catch up. And when mine comes up, I'm going to give you some tips on how to use the Instruct platform, maybe some gotchas and things like that. And then we'll get into one of the labs. Great. Quickly, before I start here, I'll see if there's any questions. If anyone has trouble getting to the Instruct platform, anything else like that, feel free to raise your hand or go into the chat with any kind of questions, issues, things like that. All right. Perfect. So let's continue on here. Now, when we come into the Instruct platform, this is going to allow us to go through, again, the entire lab where on the left-hand side, I have a number. So Instruct is actually like a browser within a browser platform as part of how it works. So what we actually see on the left-hand side are a number of browser tabs. One of them is for Harness itself. And actually right here, it's It's showing us the ability to sign in. There's some other tabs in here. So for example, your lab credentials are going to be in a tab. They'll also be in the instructions on the right-hand side, which I'll get to here in a second. And then you can, if you need to, launch the Harness platform outside of the Instruct browser and browser environment. I'll explain that here in a minute, but let's hold off on that just one second. On the right-hand side of the screen, what you're going to see are instructions. Now, we've broken this down into a number of labs, and what you're able to do is to scroll through these instructions. Make sure that as you go through this, you actually scroll down to the bottom. There may be a number of different steps in each one of the labs. Be able to see information about what to do. So this is going to guide you. So for example, it says, hey, this is how we would log into Harness. Here's your username. I can copy it right here. Here's your password. It's stored for you in that lab credentials tab if you ever need to get to it later. Here's how we sign in. So all of these instructions are here for you on the right-hand side. At the end of each section, what you want to do is click the check button over here. The check button will basically make sure that you've done all the things that you need to up to this point and that everything is good for us to continue to the next lab. Now, if for some reason you get stuck or you get distracted by a call or something else, and at some point you want to come back and just skip to where we are, you can, of course, skip these as well. If you skip it, it'll catch you up with all of the work needed for the next lab and the next lab after that and so forth. So if something arises, you need to skip, that's okay. We can do that. But in general, what you'll want to do is go through the instructions. At the end, hit the check button. That'll give you a thumbs up if everything's gone right. And hopefully that is. If not, feel free to, again, ask me, raise your hand, comment in the chat and so forth, and continue with the next lab. Now, a couple of different things you'll see here. So this talks again about the Instruct platform. It's a browser-in-browser methodology to simplify the hands-on experience. Because it's browser-in-browser, depending on your resolution, depending on your monitors and all that, it may be a little bit smaller than we'd want it to. So you can, zoom your browser, zoom it in and out using different keys or, using your menus as I'm doing here with Chrome. And if you have challenges, at times we've seen people who are participating in the workshops have some challenges with the browser-in-browser platform. Maybe they're getting logged out of Harness, or it's just not working as smoothly as they want to. That's where you could just say, hey, launch this outside of the browser-in-browser experience. So I'll click on this. What this will do is bring up that same exact account, and you could do the same exact sign on here. Now you're no longer in the browser-to-browser. That's nice. You get the full experience. The downside, of course, is that the lab instructions are over here. So if you can do it in the browser-in-browser experience, a little bit easier. If not, then you may need a couple of windows or a couple of tabs, one for Harness and one for the instructions. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log into the Harness account. So I'm going to copy the username over here. And if we see here, it says, for signing in, we're going to use a single sign-on. In this case, we're using a single sign-on system. That's an option, of course, to use. We could tie into various SAML and SSO-based systems. We're using, I think, Keycloak in the background for this one. And everyone should have a unique username and password to use to log into their workshop environment. So I'm going to sign in here. And now the next thing the instructions have us do is to change to a project. Each one of us has a project that we have access to. We don't have access to each other's projects. I'll talk about that here in a second, but to go ahead and select that project. Now, over here on the left-hand side, so this screenshot shows us where to go. So on the left-hand side of Harness, this is our scope selector. So in Harness, you can have various different scopes. There's the account scope that would represent your entire company, organization, whatever that may be. You have an organization scope that would be maybe a line of business, a business unit, some other large segmentation of your population, of the folks who are going to be in harness. And then underneath that, you have projects. So this 3-tier hierarchy. Also in harness, we have very granular role-based access to basically every type of resource. Every entity within harness can be granularly controlled. Now, in this case, we're not doing anything super granular, but at the highest level, every one of us has access to a project, an individual project. We will not be able to see each other's projects. We'll not be able to see other labs that are being done in Instruct and things like that, we're doing with harness. So there's one project you should be able to see, and you're going to go ahead and select that project. And at the end of this, we can go ahead and click the check button. And what this is going to do in a second is going to say, great, you've succeeded. You were able to log in. You're able to select your project. It's now time to move to the next lab. Obviously, the first lab, not very interesting. We're just getting access to harness. But as we get into the next lab, now this will get much more interesting. In the background here, I can see where everyone is. So I see a list of our attendees, the folks who are on this call, and I can keep track if anyone's kind of having issues or anything else like that. But again, I'm not necessarily going to be watching that the whole time. So if anyone does get stuck or needs help, please do raise your hand or jump on chat, and I'd be happy to stop and help you along the way. Awesome. So I'm going to continue here with Lab 1. Now, again, all of this information is available. The instructions are available here. I'm going to walk through this myself, and all of you, of course, are going to be walking through this individually in your own sandbox environments. But there's a number of instructions here that walks us through how to set up a build stage within harness. So first, actually creating our first pipeline, setting up a build stage, and then adding a number of different tasks to that build stage. That would be the things that you'd want to do as part of your build, including things like unit tests, including things like compiling, pushing it into an artifact repository, and so forth. Now, one of the first things the instructions ask us to do is to change our view. Now, if I click on this the little 9 dots at the top left, which is what the instructions have us do, you're going to see a number of our different capabilities, are the harness modules here. And if you go into any individual one, you're going to get some specific menus and things like that that are very much focused on that capability. We also have a unified view that gives you kind of the high level of all of those capabilities. The instructions say go to that unified view, and on the left-hand side, we now see all of the different capabilities and have the ability to open up kind of menus and for all of those different capabilities. Note that you can scroll this and come down to the bottom where there's some settings. We may not have access to all of those because in this lab, we don't have access to like account settings and organization settings. We will have access to project settings because we're all administrators in our own project. But what it wants us to do, just for ease of use here, is go to that unified view. From here, we're going to go ahead and create our first pipeline. We'll do that by clicking on the pipelines on the left-hand side. And by the way, notice that pipelines are kind of separated from all of the different individual capabilities. One of the reasons for that is that pipelines can be used for general orchestration and automation. So anywhere you need orchestration automation across any of these capabilities over here, pipelines can help with that. The pipelines are designed to work with all of these capabilities, and then, of course, all of the other tools that you may already have in your organizations. But it's separated because those pipelines are agnostic. They're going to work with all of these different capabilities. We'll go ahead and create our first pipeline. And then there's instructions here around how to configure things as we go along the way. So as an example, it says, let's go ahead and name this workshop build and deploy. I'm just going to click the copy button and paste over here. In some cases, you may want to type it out. In most cases, the information you put here is not going to be like critical, like I can name this something else and it'll be just fine. However, there's going to be things where like sometimes we have file paths or other things like that, and it'll be important to make sure that we get those right. So I recommend you do copy and paste where you can from the instructions into your design of your pipelines. And so now that we have our pipeline, it says we're going to go ahead and add our first stage. A stage is like a major unit of work. It could represent, for example, builds and deploys and things with security or infrastructure or other things like that. The reason we break these out, each one has kind of unique capabilities depending on what you're trying to do. In this case, we're doing builds. So I'm going to select that build stage. It says, let's go ahead and name it build. So I'll just copy and paste that. There's a nice little button that says clone our code base, so I don't have to think about that. It will automatically do it for me. It says, where is your source for your build, like your code source? And over here, I have a couple of different options. I can go with Harness Code Repository. So Harness does have a code repository, and that's what we're going to be using in the workshop. Or of course, many folks are already using a GitHub, a GitLab, a Bitbucket, something else like that. We support all of those. Again, in the workshop, we're going to keep this at Harness Code Repository, and we're going to select the one repository. It says DevDays repo, the one repository that we have access to, and we're going to go ahead and set up our stage. When you're new to Harness, Harness oftentimes has these little pop-ups that'll explain different capabilities to you. So for example, here it's talking about what type of build infrastructure you have access to. It could be cloud, it could be a containerized environment, VMs, local machines, things like that. Now, this may be something you want to go through, which is perfectly fine. Because I've already, of course, seen this, I'm familiar with it, I'm going to click on the Don't Show again, and I'm going to close this. You guys can choose to do that or allow those kind of hints and pop-ups to come up as we go along here. But as we go through here, one of the key things we'll have to decide is what build infrastructure do we want to use? Again, we allow customers to have self-hosted infrastructure, whether that's container-based or VM-based or local machines, things like that. Harness also has a cloud-hosted infrastructure. This cloud-hosted infrastructure is hyper-optimized, again, to deliver the best results in terms of speed and caching and things like that. So that's one of the key features that oftentimes we use when we're comparing and doing some of those comparisons where we come up with 4, 5, 6x faster builds than other build systems out there. And we're going to be using that for the workshop today. So go ahead and select cloud. You'll also, by the way, notice sometimes there's nice little notes in here, warnings and other things that'll explain some of the concepts or some of the gotchas to think about. When you do select cloud, make sure you keep the Linux operating system AMD 64 architecture. We're going to be deploying Linux-based containers, or we're going to be building Linux-based containers and then deploying them to an AMD 64 environment. If you were to change this, your deployments would fail. So let's make sure we keep these in here. And from here, we can either click continue or we can click on this execution tab. The instructions have us click on the execution tab, where now we can add 3 steps to our build process or our build stage. And these are going to be, we want to, excuse me, execute unit tests. We want to compile the application. And we want to build and push that into an artifact repository. As we go down here, this will tell us how to do so. The first step, it says to click the Add Step icon. And from here, we can add an individual step, a step group, or use a template. Templatization is a key capability within Harness. You can templatize pipelines, stages, steps. It's one of the key things our customers do when they're scaling to, we have customers with tens of thousands of developers, thousands of microservices, things like that. One of the key elements in helping scale up in terms of maintainability, upgradability, all that good stuff. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to add a step. And from the step library, we're going to go ahead and select Test Intelligence. Now, we call it Test Intelligence because it's one of those key features that we have that helps reduce the overall build stage time. Test Intelligence can automatically detect changes in code so that when we do our unit tests, say in a feature branch where I'm making some small changes, every time I do a build, I don't have to go through potentially thousands of unit tests that have nothing to do with what I'm doing. I could have Harness focus in on just those tests that are relevant to the work I'm doing. And this happens in a fully automated fashion. And then maybe when we're merging back to the main line, that's when we'll do the full unit test suite along with other types of tests, functional and other things that we may want to do. So over here, it says to give this a name of Test Intelligence. I'm going to go ahead and replace the name here. And the command that we want to execute here, this is a Python-based code base. So we're going to run PyTest. And when I'm done configuring this step, I can click Apply Changes and hit Save. This, by the way, explains, again, some of the concepts behind Test Intelligence. Now, I won't go into a lot of detail on the next two. Now that I've shown you how one of these works, I'm just going to kind of more quickly go through some of these. You guys, again, feel free to keep along. And if you have questions, issues, get stuck, raise your hands, please. But I'm going to go ahead and, sorry, I'm in the wrong place. We're going to go back into our build execution view, and we're going to add another step. In this one, we're going to use a template. So we have a compile template already created for us. That means, maybe if I have my standard Python compile or my standard Maven build or Gradle build or whatever else it is, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Someone's already done that. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that template. And it says, let's go ahead and name this compile. And then the last thing is we're going to go ahead and push this into Google Artifact Registry. So we're going to add a step. We're going to look for build and push to GAR, or we can actually search for it if we wanted to. And then down here, there is a note here. Make sure it's Google Artifact Registry and not Google Container Registry, which is the older version of this. Then we're going to configure this step. So it says, use this name just as an example. Again, if you use a different name, it's not going to be a big issue. We're going to select our connector. Our connector is an integration point. It defines an integration with one of your systems, your cloud systems, your SCMs, your different various tools, your ticketing systems, your scanning tools, and things like that. So these connectors are scoped integrations to your various tools that can be access controlled. So make it easy to use, easy to make sure we have the right levels of access and things like that. So we already have one set up here for you called Workshop GAR. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this. So here's my host, project ID. image name. For tags, we have to click the add button. We can add one or more tags. And if you notice here, this is an interesting little notation. This is actually referencing data within Harness. So this notation that we see here, where this is at the front and this is at the back, this is going to be replaced by data that we have within anywhere in our pipeline here. So this is going to use our username and a sequence ID for our pipeline to tag the artifact that we build and we push into the registry or repository. Now there's an optional configuration section here for what we're doing in the lab. We actually have to go ahead and fill in two pieces: the Docker file location and the context. It doesn't always need to be, but for what we're doing, we're going to go ahead and use those. So at this point, it says to go ahead and apply changes, save our pipeline, and now we're going to be able to execute this pipeline. You do that by clicking on the run. It's going to say, hey, which branch do you want to execute this against? And then we could do run pipeline. Now, before I move on from here, I'll mention that while we're doing this manually, we're kicking off this pipeline manually, that's not how typically pipelines are executed. So usually how this is done is that your SCM, whether it's Harness Code Repo or it's another SCM, has a trigger set up in there that Harness will set up automatically for you, so that when you do a commit, when you do a PR, when you do whatever the right activities are, it'll automatically trigger the pipeline, pass in the information, the context about what you're doing, and Harness will automatically pick that up and work on that. In our workshop, we're not going to actually be making changes to code or anything else like that. We're not going to be creating PRs. So we're going to manually trigger this instead. Now, this may take a couple of minutes to run here, but we're going to go ahead and let that run in the background. And when that's done, I'm going to go ahead and click the check button to make sure everything is where we need it to be, everything's configured correctly and executed correctly. And once I have that, I'll be able to move on to the next lab. Now, of course, everyone here, I'm going to be moving fast because I have a lot of experience in Harness. You, of course, don't, or many of you don't. So we'll pause here, make sure everyone catches up. And again, if there's any questions, any issues, anyone getting stuck, please feel free to jump into the chat or raise your hand, and I'll be happy to help make sure that you catch up with everyone. Great. So I'm going to pause here for 2 or 3 minutes, make sure everyone catches up. I'll go off of camera for just a second, and I'll be back in about 2 or 3 minutes. We'll make sure everyone's caught up to this, and then we'll move on to the next lab. All right, I see a message in here. Getting an error mismatch for step compile in property. Expected compile application got none. Okay, let me see if I can help you. So in the background here, one of the things I can do is actually get access to your context, like your workshop, your individual projects and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do here is take a look at yours and see if I could figure out if there's a configuration or something else like that that we may have to change. So give me 1 second here. Could you, by the way, share your project name? For whatever reason, it's not showing up on my side. Normally, I have access to that, but I'm not seeing that. Could you share your project name in the chat? Okay, 3487. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So I see what happened here. Kiribakaran, so for that second step, if you remember, we added, let me show you on the screen over here. Actually, yeah, I'm still sharing. Um, I'm going to go back to my editor. For this second step within our build stage, this compile, what we're using, and this is if I scroll back up, what we had to do is to click the add. I'm actually going to add it back here, and then I'll remove it from mine, but add. And then it says to use a template. So we click the use template, and then we have this compile application template. So I see that you added a run step as opposed to this template. If you want, go ahead and remove your kind of run step that's here. You can click on the little X to remove it. And then when you want to add something, like once you remove this one, I'll actually do it with you. So you remove this one, just as an example. And if I want to add something in the middle here, I mouse over in the middle of this line. I see the plus, and then I can come in here and say, for example, use this template. So if you want, go ahead and do that. If you're having trouble, let me know. I could do it on your behalf as well. But I think now that we know what the challenge was, I think you should be able to go ahead and fix that, remove that middle step, and then again, go in here and add that templatized step called compile application. By the way, mine did finish. So I'm looking at the editor here. If I go to my execution history, I could see that I went through I went through an execution. It completed for me. You'll notice a few different things that are on this list that were not there when we configured it. Setting up build and cloning the code base, that's automatically done for us. Setting up build intelligence, cache intelligence, which there's a piece here, there's a piece here. So Harness does all of these things automatically. Again, the goal here being let's reduce the build time and the build activity time as much as possible. And again, it's got all of this intelligence built in so that you don't have to think about what are the right things for me to cache, what are the right things for me to, what are the other things, configurations I can do with my compilers and other things like that to speed up our build times. Harness can automatically do a lot of these things just based on a checkbox, enable our intelligence, and it will do these things for us. Since I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and hit the check button. If anyone else is done, you can hit the check button as well. And that'll tell us if we were successful and if we can continue on. Again, I'm going to pause here. If no one else has issues, great. If you do, go ahead and put that into the chat or raise your hand. But I'll pause here for a second, make sure everyone is caught up, and then we'll move on to the next lab over here. And awesome. I can see in the background that a lot of you have already completed this. And actually, many of you may be already past this next slide. And if you want to buzz through this faster than I'm going, feel free to do so. Again, we'll eventually catch up. So if you have any issues or anything, we can help you out. But if you are just moving quickly through this workshop, feel free to do so. You don't have to slow down and go with me here. All right, so I'm going to continue here and move on into lab 2. So lab 2 is going to be around our first deployment. We're going to be deploying a front end over here, and we're going to be using a rolling strategy to do so. So again, all the instructions are on the right-hand side around what we need to do. At any point, again, to go back to edit this pipeline, I can, if I'm in a previous execution, which I am here, we can see like this is my build ID. It's successful. It took this long to run and so forth. I can see the little icons that indicate, these were successful steps. This was a successful stage. I could click on this edit pipeline, and that takes me back to my pipeline studio where I can make changes. Or if I accidentally go somewhere else, I can come to my pipelines on the left-hand side here. I can see my workshop build and deploy. That's the one we're all working on together. And I can click in there and get back to my pipeline studio in my editor. So what we're going to do here is we're going to work on our next stage. Again, what we've done so far is we've tested, compiled, and then packaged our artifact, pushed it into an artifact repository. Now it's time for us to deploy it. So we're going to go ahead and click on a new stage, and we're going to use a deploy stage. Go ahead and copy the name and paste it here. Now you're going to see a number of different deployment types, things like Kubernetes and native Helm. There's serverless, whether you're talking about the serverless framework, Lambda, Google Cloud Functions, Azure Functions. There's web apps, ECS, a number of different things here. We have capabilities through Secure Shell and WinRM to do kind of more traditional architectures. There's also an ability to expand on this. So there's an ability for customers to add new deployment types that live right alongside all these in their own harness environments. Now, of course, we're not going to do that today. We're going to do something a little bit more cloud native with Kubernetes here. And we're going to go ahead and set up our stage. Now, in a harness deployment or deploy stage, there's 3 main concepts that come together. The service is the what. What are we going to deploy? The environment is the where. Where are we going to deploy that service? And the execution is the how. What are the steps that we want to go through as part of this deployment? For this lab, what we're going to do is we're going to create a service from scratch. The environment's already created for us, so we don't have to do that. And then we're going to configure the execution, the steps in the how. It's going to be an easy one, but we're going to do that together here. So what the instructions have us to do is to say, hey, when we're on the services tab, we're not going to select a service. We'll do that in a later lab. But for this one, because we want to show you how everything is made, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new service. So we'll click this add service. Oops. And then we're going to configure it based on the information over here. We call this front end, just like it says in the documentation. As I scroll down, and the scroll bar is a little small, so it may not be obvious. You can see the scroll bar right here. So there's more down here. It's automatically going to be set to Kubernetes because we've already decided our stage is based on a Kubernetes deployment. And then we're going to add a couple of different things. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with Kubernetes deployments, a couple of things that oftentimes come into play are going to be manifest files and then artifacts, the artifact being that container image that we pushed into Google Artifact Registry. So it doesn't matter if you're not super familiar with this. This will walk us through what to do here. It says that what we want to do is to add a manifest. Now, a manifest is YAML. It's YAML that describes some configurations for this containerized service. And it says, how's this specified? Is it a Kubernetes manifest? Kates is short for Kubernetes. Is it a Helm chart? Is it an OpenShift template? Is it customized? These are different technologies or ways of specifying your manifest. We're going to use a standard Kubernetes manifest. That's what it says right here. And it says, where does this manifest live? Where are we going to pull it from? And again, we have lots of different options. We're going to go ahead and use the Harness code repository. And we're going to configure this. It says, give this manifest a name. We're going to call it templates. What repository does this live in? Same repository we selected before. What's our branch? It's main. If you notice, I typed that one, easy to do. As we get into these other ones, like for example, it's where within this repo are my manifest files. I'm going to copy and paste this because I don't want to make a mistake in typing this out. I'll copy and paste that. It'll be a lot easier. And then under values, it says to click the add file. The values is a optional piece, so you don't have to have it, but in our case, we do. Click add file. And then we put in the path to the values file. Again, this is the path within the repo. And so that sets up our manifest files. If you remember, the other thing that's going to be important as part of a Kubernetes deployment is going to be the artifact source itself. So we add a new artifact source. Our artifact lives in Google Artifact Registry, same place we stored it in our build stage. And so it says, where's your connector? If you remember, we had to select this when we were configuring the build and push stage. So the same connector, again, is that integration we have to Google Artifact Registry. And then we configure a few pieces here. It says, what do we want to call this? We'll call it front end. What is the project ID? What is the region? I can select US. I can also type it so it gives me a filtered list of regions here. I'll mention one thing. The repository name and package are things that we should be able to automatically pull and give you a list of that you can select from. For some reason, we're having some, and I saw this recently as I ran through it. I haven't had a chance to fix this yet. But there's a permissions issue. Again, Harness has very detailed and granular role-based access controls and permissions, things like that. There's a permissions issue, excuse me, with the roles that we've been given in this workshop that's preventing our connector from pulling this information. That's okay. We can get past this by just typing in what we want and then clicking the little plus button right here, right? So I'm going to type in SE Workshop. For the package, I'm going to type in or copy paste Harness Workshop and then click on the plus here. So again, a little hiccup with the permissions. It's not going to stop us. We can get past it very easily just by manually copying, pasting that in here. And then lastly, it says for the version, if you notice, the version right now says input. And what that means is this is going to be something that someone or some other system is going to give us at runtime. We don't know. We're not going to configure right now. For the purpose of the workshop, we want to change that. We don't want to ask for that later. So we're going to go ahead and change the type for this field from an input. That's what it is right now. I do that by clicking this little sigma icon, this indicator on the right-hand side, and changing it to an expression. And we're going to copy paste our expression in there. And again, that expression is that harness variable notation. If you remember, this is the same notation we used to tag our artifact in the build stage. We're now going to use it to be able to pull and deploy that same exact version over here. So it says hit submit, hit save. So now we've configured our service. This is the what we're going to deploy. And when we click continue, it says, where do we want to deploy to? That's our environment. We're going to select the dev environment. We have two environments to select from. We're going to select dev. And then in each environment, you may have multiple infrastructures. So there may be multiple dev environment, dev infrastructures or QA or production infrastructures. So we'll also specify the infrastructure, which in this case, we only have one in our dev environment. And then the last thing is, if we hit continue or if we go to the execution tab, either way, it's going to say, what strategy do you want to use to execute this? Now, the most simple way of doing a container-based deployment is going to be a rolling deployment. There's some advanced ones as well. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later on as we get into the next lab, or we can have a blank canvas where we just build it from scratch. In our case, we're going to say we're going to use a simple rolling strategy. What that's going to do is it's automatically going to create our, again, rolling super easy, our one-step rollout. It's automatically configured a rollback. So in case there's an issue, it'll automatically be able to roll it back. But very simple for this one. We're going to save. We're going to run. Again, normally this would not be manually done. It could be fully automated with your SCMs, your artifact repos, things like that, but we'll do it manually for the purpose of the workshop. Before we had just the one input, now we have a second input, but we're going to leave them as is and click Run Pipeline. And just like that, we're about an hour in, though I'll say it probably took us a good 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get kind of introduced and started up and get everyone access. So let's say within the last 30, 35 minutes, I think most folks have probably gotten to this point where in Harness, we are building our application, including testing and all of the kind of intelligence that goes with it. We didn't really have to do much. Harness does a lot of that for us. We are compiling that application. We're creating an artifact and pushing it into the Google Artifact Registry. And now we're going to also be able to deploy that into a dev environment. So again, on a different screen, I'm kind of tracking where everyone is. I see a lot of folks already here, some folks who've already gone into some of the labs that are subsequent to this one. So great work, everyone, on getting here and potentially even past this lab. Again, this will take a couple of minutes. If I remember correctly, my first build stage took about a minute. Actually, it took about 2.5 minutes. Now, this one actually may end up being a little bit faster because some of the intelligence here is working a second time and is learning what to cache and how to cache and using those caches and stuff like that. This one may end up being faster. The deployment's going to be fairly quick too. So it'll take a couple of minutes here, but I'll then be able to go ahead and hit the check button and make sure that everything is done and we can move on to the next lab. Now, I will say normally this moves on pretty quickly, where we were stuck a little bit at the resource constraint. That just may be the number of folks we have on here, number of people trying to deploy to a kind of a shared environment, stuff like that. This is the Instruct environment, of course, is like there's some shared resources that we're all using and stuff like that. So that may have slowed things down a little bit, but it looks like we're now past that. My rollout deployment is complete, and I can go ahead and click check to make sure everything's done. Before I do that, one of the things we haven't looked at is that, at any point I can come in here if I'm trying to figure out what happened and go in and actually look at like the individual steps. I can open up the step details and get all of the logs of what happened there. So whether it's, for example, the compile over here, it's like our rollout deployment. Um, it's nicely formatted for me. So here we're fetching our files. Here we're initializing. We're preparing or applying it. We're waiting for steady state. Some people, in fact, prefer that kind of log view. So we do have this option to just say, hey, instead of showing me the pipeline kind of visualization, just show me the logs. And so we'll see, here's our build stage. Here's all of the different steps we went through. I can click on any of these and see all the logs in there, including, again, our deployments, all the information about how that deployment went, preparation, waiting for steady state, all that good stuff. One other thing you'll notice is because we ran this a second time, it says, hey, we saved about a minute in our build stage with harness intelligence. So that's cool. That second build, the first build, now this is not a heavy one, right? This is just for workshop purposes, pretty quick. It took maybe close to 3 minutes the first time I ran it. The second time I ran it, it only took 2 minutes. Now, extrapolate that out into a real build that can oftentimes take 30, 40 minutes with all of the other activities that you do. And if you can take off a third of that just like that, that could be a huge, huge benefit, huge time savings for all of those developers. So I'm going to continue on, hit the check button, and Instruct should say, hey, everything is good here, and we're ready to move on into the next lab. Since we're about an hour in, let me pause for a minute. Again, in the background here, I'm going to check to see if everyone's keeping up, if anyone has any issues or anything else like that. If anyone wants to come off of mute, raise your hands with any questions or comments, or provide that in the chat. I want to make sure everyone is keeping up. If there's any issues, again, happy to look at your environment and make sure that we can get you past any of those issues, so you can get to the end of this lab here over the next hour successfully. So I'll take a 2-minute pause here for everyone to catch up. Again, look for any questions, any hands raised, and then we'll continue on. All right. No hands up, no chat. Hopefully everyone is keeping up, which is awesome. Great job. We're going to go ahead and continue on into lab number 3. So just as a reminder, as part of lab 1, we created our build stage. In lab 2, we created our front-end deployment stage, and that included setting up a service and then selecting from an existing environment and infrastructure that was already set up for us, and then selecting a deployment pattern, an easy one in this case, a kind of standard one, rolling. We'll do something more here in this next lab. One thing I'll mention, by the way, is that um, for most customers who are looking to scale CI/CD practices and DevOps out to like the larger audience at their organizations, a lot of this stuff is done for the application teams automatically. So Harness provides automation to help scale up and scale out your projects and all the specific resources that each team would need, their environments, their services, their secrets, their, all the other things that you may need. Harness provides automation to be able to scale that up quickly. Now, that automation could be direct API access. More likely, it's going to be the Harness Terraform provider that most of our customers use, again, to quickly scale this out to large audiences within their organization. I'm going to pause it real quick. Adrian, I see a note from you. Sounds like you may have an issue here. Error on build. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and look into your environment. Thanks for bringing that up. Let's get this solved for you. And actually, again, it's not giving me, there's a couple different ways I can access your environment. One of the ways I normally do it, it's not letting me right now. Could you give me your username or your project ID, your project name? I'll be able to look in that way as well. You can just post that in the chat, Adrian. So your username is the one that you logged in with. It'll be in your lab credentials tab. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you could do is your project name. If you look up, well, it's, for example, right here. This is like the project we initially selected. It's also going to be in the URL over here. You may see this. Really what I need is like that you're going to have 4 unique digits there. Those 4 unique digits will help me get to your project, and I can take a look to see what's going on. So my credentials, by the way, are right here. So my username actually has this 9580 in there, right? And if I go in here, actually my project name matches that as well. Okay, perfect. Okay, you know what? I thought it was going to be just, I guess it's not just digits, it's alphanumeric. So perfect though. I'll take a look right there. Give me 1 second. All right. So let's take a look. So you're having challenges in the build. Okay. So what may be happening here, what I see that you've done, Adrian, is that you've taken your 3 steps that we want to do. Let me go back over here. Edit pipeline. You've taken the 3 steps we want to do in the build, and what you've done is actually say, let's run them all at the same time. So I'm going to show you how yours looks over here. Oh, wait a minute, why is this not allowing me to, there we go. It's just doing something funny on the screen. So Yours is set up kind of like this. Now, one of the things Harness can do is to run things parallel, as opposed to in sequence, whether it's different steps within a stage or different stages can be run in parallel. In some cases, it makes sense to do that. That helps kind of shrink the time if there's no dependencies between the different activities. Excuse me. In some cases, we can't do that. So in this case, these do need to run sequentially. What you can do is take this and drag and drop this. I'm having a hard time because for some reason my screen is not, it's putting like a weird box. This may be something to do with the browser in browser. Normally you'd be able to just drag, okay, there we go. Drag it over here from your parallel steps, and that'll put them in sequence. And you noticed earlier, by the way, I kind of brought it over here and made it parallel. So let me go ahead and fix this. I'll move this to the end. In fact, what I'm going to do is just, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to discard or anything because it says, oh, this is just the way you started. But in your case, you can go ahead and put those in sequence and give it another try. Cool. Awesome. I'm going to continue on, Adrian, but if you do still need help, definitely raise your hand and I'll come back to that as well. Cool. So now in lab 3, we're going to go ahead and deploy our backend artifact. So in this case, we have both a kind of a front-end artifact and a backend artifact. We're going to go ahead and deploy that backend. And it says to go into our Pipeline Studio editor by, again, if you're looking at a previous execution, you'd hit the edit button, or you can come back to your pipelines. There's a few different ways to get there. And we're going to add a second deploy stage. Since you're already familiar with this a little bit, I'll go a little faster this time. But we're going to copy and paste our name. It's going to be another Kubernetes-based deployment. Now, in this case, we don't want you to reconfigure another service. So a service has been created for you. You could just go in here and select the backend service. Remember, we created the front end manually together, but the backend was already created for us. We can go ahead and select that. In the environment tab, we can, again, specify the environment, or we could actually even use this propagate from. The propagate says, hey, whatever we were using before, like in this stage, let's use it again. So we only have to configure that once, and then like the subsequent ones will just automatically take what we used before. If it makes sense in this case for what we're doing, it does. And then when we continue on in here, again, we're going to have these different execution strategies, deployment strategies. And instead of using rolling, we're going to use a more advanced strategy. So the reason for using an advanced strategy, it's not something you normally want to do in a dev environment, but in maybe a staging environment or especially in production, if you want to make sure that any changes, any deployments you make don't have impact on your customers, your end users, or maybe have minimal impact, excuse me, you can use one of these different advanced deployment strategies. Most organizations want to de-risk those customer-facing deployments so that they don't have outages or other negative, consequences for their customers. And they want to take advantage of things like Blue Green or Canary, but it can be hard to design kind of for each team and stuff like that, the different patterns and stuff like that, or to do it for the various cloud stacks, various application stacks, whatever it may be. The nice thing again is Harness can provide that out of the box. So I can just select Canary here. It'll show me like what that means, hit the use button, and it's already set up a very simple Canary deployment. Now, I say simple because it looks simple on the screen. Of course, in the back end, there's more to it, but very easy from the end user's perspective to understand what that is. We're going to do a Canary deployment. Normally, what would happen is in the middle of this, there may be some testing that we do. We'll come back to that later. After we are good with this, we'll go ahead and delete the Canary pods. and we'll continue doing a full rollout so that everyone gets the new deployment. And a rollback again has been automatically set for us. Everything here, I just have to select the strategy. Harness does the rest. I can hit save, hit run. If you notice now we have 3 different inputs. Again, not typically how we run things, but just for workshop purposes. Go ahead and hit run. And now we're going to go through our process, our pipeline again, do the build, do the test, push it into our repository, and then deploy both the front end and back end. So this will take roughly about 3 minutes, I think, to finish. 3.5 minutes to get all the way to the back end deployment. And at that point, we can move on to lab number 4. In the meantime, I'll be here to help out anyone who may need help, anyone who's stuck. Please do raise your hand or just jump into the chat. In the background, I see a lot of folks have already completed this one, which is awesome. Great job. There are a few folks who have not completed this or maybe even be a lab behind. Again, sometimes it's, work happens and we get distracted. Sometimes we're just stuck. So if you are stuck, happy to help get you unstuck. If you need to skip some of the different labs and just catch up to where we are, which is lab 3, and where we're going, lab 4, you can do that with the skip button. So there's a couple different ways. Just let me know if there's anything I could do to help. Be happy to help you catch up and continue on. Minimize this so we can see that we're about to finish our build stage here, and that means we'll be able to go into our deployment stages. And just as a reminder, these are 2 different services that we're pushing out here, and we're putting them into the same environment. A very common pattern, by the way, is to have a progressive deployment into different environments. So it's build, and then you may go into a dev environment. And if everything's working over there, we then move into a QA environment, into a staging environment, potentially even into a production environment, though that's more advanced. Oftentimes kind of production deployments can be separated out from the non-production deployments, but we do have customers who are, who have at least some services that are ready to, they're true CI/CD, ready to go into production as long as they, pass all of the other testing throughout the other environments. So, which is awesome. You'll notice, by the way, in our backend deployment, which is the new stage, we went through the canary deployment. Now, again, one of the things we don't have in here is kind of any kind of verification. We haven't added that just yet. But normally, after the canary deployment and before the full rollout, there's activities we take to make sure everything's good. We're not going to impact customers before we then do a full rollout and make sure everyone gets the latest. I'm going to do a check on my lab, and it says, all right, we're successful. Everything looks good. And so we'll be able to move on to the next lab, which is going to be focused on security. So as part of this lab, we're going to be adding some built-in scanners into our pipeline. Now, those scanners may have different purposes. There can be composition analysis scanners, there can be container image scanners, dynamic application testing scanners, things like that. There's a number of different scanners that everyone may use. For the purpose of the workshop, we're going to be using some kind of like out-of-the-box scanners, but Harness also supports all of the different scanners that you may already have in your environment, right? Whether that's Wiz or SonarCube or Aqua or whatever those things may be, we have integrations to make sure that all of those can be represented in your pipeline so that not only can you build fast as we've done, deploy fast and safely as we've done, but you can make sure that your security posture is met, that you're not introducing critical vulnerabilities or other things like that into a production environment that could impact your organization, your customers. Again, we want to make sure we get that into the pipeline. And there's really two perspectives we think about here. One is the perspective from, say, the SecOps team, who cares to make sure that everything is run, I's are dotted, T's are crossed. We make sure that those critical vulnerabilities or things that shouldn't get out into a later stage environment don't get there. But also, we need to make this easy for the developers. If we're going to be running security tests on a regular basis as part of a DevSecOps kind of mentality, we got to make sure we're not burdening those developers with a lot of data, a lot of like things that they have to figure out to understand, all right, what's related to what I'm doing? Like, what do I need to do with this? How do I solve this? How do I make sure I can get unstuck and continue on with my pipeline? So Harness does both. It's the beautiful balance between the needs of those various different audiences. So let's see that in action. We're going to go ahead and edit our pipeline. And the different scanners here are, by default, the instructions are minimized. So I'll go ahead and expand that out. It says for SCA, excuse me, we're going to go to the build stage. We're going to go to after the compile for the push to the artifact registry. And if I hover my mouse over that line, I get that plus sign. So I can add something in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit add step. And it says, go down to the security test section, built-in scanners. By the way, you'll notice that we have, again, integrations with all of the different things that you may use. But we're going to go to the built-in scanner section. I'm going to select SCA. It's going to say we have two options. You can choose one or the other. We're going to choose both. Hit add scanners. And that's it. Now, the instructions do say to rename it. It's not super important. I'll go ahead and rename it. It just makes it look nicer. Takes that little number 1 out of there. And that's it. So now we're doing SCA scans as part of our pipeline. Now we'll continue doing that by now doing a container image scan. Now the container image scan has to be after we push the container into the registry. So we're going to do it at the end. If I come down to my built-in scanners, I'm going to select container. In this case, it's going to say, hey, let's just use Aqua. We're going to go ahead and skip gripe over here. We do have to make some configurations here. One's going to be, where is this image? And we're going to say it's in Docker. Sorry, a Docker v2 compliant repository. It's not Docker necessarily itself. Here is the image that we want. And then we do have to make a couple of different changes over here. So in our Aqua Trivi step, again, we can give it a nice looking name over here, as well as we need the domain over here. We're going to set those up. And then when you're doing a container scan, now, one of the things we haven't mentioned yet is that this can all be a containerized environment that Harness runs in. All these steps can be containerized and all that. So when you need to then scan a container, that's called, the kind of terminology there, or the thinking there is it's Docker in Docker. So you're doing a container, you're doing container activities within a container. So you need to have this Docker in Docker step over here. Now, again, it's automatically added over here for you, but we do need to make a couple of configurations. It's under the additional configuration. The first thing is we need to select a container registry. Where do we get the Docker and Docker image? When you come in here, we're going to have the account scope automatically selected, but actually, I think this is in our organization, or you can go to the all scope. And that's where you're going to see this workshop Docker connector. Actually, I think that's the only, I was thinking maybe there's two, but I think, excuse me, that's the only configuration we need to make over there. Cool. So now we have our SCA scan set up. We have our container scan set up over here. Now for dynamic application testing, what we're going to do is, now this has to be after a deployment because it's going to be like the live application. And it says we're going to be able to run this one at the same time that we're doing the backend deployment. So I can come in here, put my mouse under the backend deployment to add a parallel stage. And instead of configuring all of this ourselves, someone's created a template for us. Makes it very easy for us to consume. So I'm going to use a templated stage, very similar to the templated step that we did earlier. That was that compile step in lab 1. This is an entire stage. And we're going to use that. And it says, go ahead and name this one DAS scan. So let me copy, let me paste. One thing to note, by the way, is that the templates, oftentimes what they're designed to do is to take best practices and make them reusable, to encapsulate or hide some of the complexity that not everyone needs to be worried about, because, hey, there's just one way we do this, and you don't need to know every dial and knob that could potentially be there. In our case, both for the compile and for this DAS template stage, there's no inputs, but you can also have it where you say, hey, when we do a compile, there's 20 different options, 19 of them you don't need to think about. We'll just set like the defaults. This is how we do things at our organization. And here's the one thing that you need to provide, right? So the person or the team that sets up these templates can decide what are the things that we don't need people thinking about or worrying about. What are the things we can handle for them? And what are the unique things that they need to provide in their individual pipelines? Or the same thing can happen with a templated stage, templated pipeline, whatever that may be. In our case, we're not asking for any inputs, but that is definitely an option. And so at this point, we're going to go ahead and save, and we're going to be able to run our pipeline again. We do get a warning now. This actually ties into some of what we're going to be working on in the next lab. But this is based on our policy engine. So Harness has a policy engine that allows the central DevOps platform, SecOps, whatever teams that you may have there, to set some of the policies that the entire company needs to follow, or maybe just a part of the company and or an organization within the company needs to follow, stuff like that. The nice part about that is if you're part of that central team and you want to make sure everyone is following some of these non-negotiable things, like a non-negotiable, for example, maybe, hey, we have to use SemGrep. You can make that a policy within Harness and enforce it. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts, or make it a warning. Like in this case, hey, in Q4, we're going to require this. So you should add it. Like at some point, we're going to stop you right now. It's just a warning, but it could also be a nope, this is a hard requirement. You can't continue on here. So it's nice from that perspective. And it's also nice because from the application team's perspective, oftentimes the application teams are not given any access to modify pipelines at all. So if you need to make a small change because, hey, 95% of what we do is the same as what the other teams are doing, but we have a slight difference here, then that application team, if they don't have access to make changes in the pipeline, and oftentimes, again, access isn't granted because those central teams are like, ooh, if we give access, what if they accidentally take out one of those like non-negotiable things? Well, again, with Harness's policy engine, it's based on OPA, which is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation Standard for Policies code. This allows those central teams to set up the policies. They're not, they can set them up so that they're not negotiable. And it allows then that team to say, hey, we can open this up and allow the application teams to come in to make those small changes that are relevant to their teams and still feel confident that one of those non-negotiables, we're not going to accidentally have someone delete that or skip that or pass that policy that we have in place because Harness is going to make sure that's enforced. So it really helps both sides of the equation work better together, get a much better experience. Now, this one's going to take a little bit longer to run because we have all those different scanners in play here. The scanners themselves are going to take some time to run. But once this is done, we're going to go ahead and see the results of all of our scanners. And I'll explain kind of what that experience is once this is run and once I have my security test tab completed here with all the information it gathers from running all these scans. Again, that'll take a few minutes here. So I'm going to pause. If anyone needs help, raise your hand, come on chat. Otherwise, we'll pause to make sure everyone's caught up. And I'll, of course, pause until mine is complete so I can show you the end results here within the security test tab. See a lot of folks in the background are running their labs here and or running their pipelines here in lab 4, which is awesome. Some folks have gotten potentially all the way to the end, which is also awesome. Just in terms of a time check, we have about 25 more minutes. There are two labs. They're going to be a little bit quicker over here, but we do have two labs to go through. And in case we run out of time, these environments again are still going to be here. So even once we end in 25 minutes, if someone is a little bit behind or if we haven't gotten there, you guys can continue on. The instructions are all there, guiding you to that end goal here. You can see, by the way, that my build stage is done. So I've got all the test results from there. My front end deployment stage is done. I'm now running my back end deployment stage and my DAS scans at the same time. So we have those in parallel. And so shortly, this should be complete and I should be able to show you the end results over here. Rudy, great question. Thank you for the feedback, by the way. I'm glad you're enjoying the session. So two things on the AI remediation, which I'm about to get to. One is that the AI capabilities within Harness, we have Gen AI built kind of throughout the product, even though we haven't really gotten into it much as part of this workshop. Those can be enabled and disabled on a per customer basis. So if you have some policies, things like that within your organization to not use it, to use it, stuff like that, we can absolutely enable it, or you have the options in yourselves in your accounts to enable and disable them. Second of all, this is not fed off of any customer data. Your customer data is not fed into this, so you don't have to worry about your data potentially training a model that other customers can use. It is no customer data goes into the models that we train. My pipeline, by the way, is complete. So now I'm going to be able to go into this security test tab. Rudy got there before I did, right? So he's been looking at this, but this is really nice because while we're not taking full advantage of all the capabilities within this workshop, I'll explain some of the things that are really nice here from an end user perspective. One is that across all of my different scanners, and in this case, I have 4 different scanners, I have a deduplicated, normalized, prioritized list of vulnerabilities that I can get to. I don't have to go to 4 different UIs. I don't have to look through log files. I don't have to wait for someone to send me a spreadsheet of items, things like that. I have them all here. Now, one of the things we're not doing in this lab is, and so we're not seeing the result of, is we have 2 different sections here in this scan compared to previous scan. What this really helps our customers do is to say, hey, I'm working on a feature branch. My mainline branch has a number of different vulnerabilities. That's not within my scope for what I'm doing. In my feature branch or something else like that, I may have introduced some libraries. I may put in some code that has vulnerabilities. This will differentiate. The rest is noise. Out of the 122, again, we're not doing it here, but maybe only 5 of these are things that are related to the work I just did. So it's going to quickly focus you to, hey, these are the things that you may have introduced that could potentially be causing your pipeline to not continue on. And then as I get in here, we're going to see some different things. So in some cases, first of all, there's all the detail in here about this vulnerability. I know with this resolution in the browser, it's a little harder to see, but we see all of the information. This one came from Aquatrivi. It has a remediation step that Aquatrivi provided. We can see CVEs and CWEs and references and all this information. In some cases, I'm not sure which one, this one right here, just as an example, OWASP has no recommendation, but Harness's AI has come up with a recommendation on how to address this critical vulnerability. So this is awesome. It's good that the scanners sometimes provide this, sometimes they don't, and Harness can add on to that with its Gen AI capability. And then on top of that, now that if I'm ready to go ahead and address this, maybe I want to create a ticket directly in Jira so I could track my work and make sure I don't forget about this. Or maybe let's say it's a 0 day, or I have some compensating controls. I can come in here and request an exemption. Let's say this is 0 day. I come in here and say, there's no fix available. Give me 30 days. Now, I can make the request. I'm not the one who's going to be able to approve it. SecOps can come in here, with the right roles and responsibilities, permissions. They can go to their dashboard, say, huh, Tom needs 30 days to fix this. We're okay with that. Give me the thumbs up. That means over the next 30 days, this is not going to block my pipeline. I'll have that much time to continue on. Of course, if I don't fix this within 30 days, or if the SecOps team decides to revoke that exemption, then my pipelines will again be blocked. So that whole activity, the collaboration with the SecOps team, things like that, all right here within my pipeline, super easy for me to do. Great user experience. We're going to go ahead and skip the bonus here. I'm going to go check, and it's going to say that I'm successful. So we're going to go ahead and move on into lab number 5. So lab number 5 is about creating policies. Again, see, these are the guardrails that we want to make sure everyone in the company, or maybe potentially part of the company, has their own policies and all that, would want to make sure we follow. So to do this, what we're going to do is go down to the project settings in the left nav. I'm going to expand my nav and scroll down. And we're going to go here. Now, these policies, again, can be set at the account level. That means everyone in the account has to follow them, or organization, everyone within that organization has to follow them. We only have access to our we're only admins in our projects. So we're each going to go into our project settings. And you can see lots of different things that we have access to here. We're going to go down to policies. Now over here, I see a overview, like how many policies do we have? How many policy sets do we have? We'll explain that as we go in here. How many evaluations do we have? Were they successful, failed, or warnings? But we're going to go in here and create a new policy. Now, again, OPA is the standard, or is the framework that we use. Policies in OPA are written in Rego. We provide out-of-the-box policies, examples on Rego is oftentimes not a familiar language for most people, but that's okay. We're not going to focus on the Rego as much today. We're just going to copy paste that one. But in this case, we're going to say we want to name this policy production approval. And we're going to go ahead and copy paste this Rego. This is the policy that says, hey, if we're going to a higher environment, then we need to make sure there's an approval. Again, we're not going to focus on the details here. There's sample policies, we have documented policies and all that, libraries of policies. But for the time being, we're just going to copy paste that one and save it. Now, policies get enforced as part of policy sets. So we also need to make a policy set. And over here, it says we're going to name this one approvals required for production deployments. We can apply these policies on lots of different things within Harness. In this case, we're going to apply it to our pipeline. We're going to say we want this to evaluate when we save it. So every time that someone saves a policy, saves a pipeline, we're going to validate that it meets the policies that we identify within this policy set. And over here, we're going to select the policies that we want to enforce here. It's just the production approval. And instead of just warning people, we're going to say, no, this is a hard requirement. If you don't have this, we're going to error out. Once I've created this, by default, it's not enforced. So I also want to make sure I click the enforce, the button here, so that it is enforced. Oh, I am not sure why my track just expired. That is an instruct thing. Oh no. All right. Hopefully we got far enough. Everyone here can continue on, even though for whatever reason, Instruct decided to restart my track. So I'll have to work with Instruct to understand why that happened. But hopefully everyone else's Instructs have not reset and you are continuing on. If anyone did get reset, please raise your hand so I can provide that feedback to the team here and to the Instruct team. But hopefully you guys can continue on by creating that policy, creating the policy set as we just did. And if you continue on with the instructions within Lab 5, what it's going to ask you to do is to go make a change to your pipeline. If you remember, we said we're deploying to dev. We're going to change that and say, let's deploy to prod. And when we do that and try to save, it's going to say you can't, we can't save this pipeline. It doesn't match our policy because if you deploy to prod, you need an approval first. So then the lab guides us to, well, okay, great. Let me show you how to put an approval in here, which will then satisfy our policy. And that way we can save our pipeline and continue executing on it. So apologies from my end. You're not going to be able to see me do this, especially given that we have about 15 minutes. I will catch up. So once this thing restarts, I'll skip and catch up into Lab 5, but everyone here can continue in the background with that lab. Again, if you have any challenges with the lab, let me know. If your instruct got reset like mine got reset, definitely let me know so that we can investigate with the instruct team and understand what happened there so that in the future, hopefully we could prevent that from happening again. Carlos, see that yours expired. I apologize for that. So we'll definitely bring that up with the instruct team. Now, I will say, and I'm not sure, Carlos, how much you've been in the session. These instruct labs do spin up resources. And therefore, if there is inactivity for, I don't know exactly what the time period is, let's say 15 or 30 minutes, let's say you're not working in the labs, that's like a purposeful expiration of that lab, and then you will restart the lab and things like that. And once you restart it, just like I did, you can decide to skip and get all the way back to whichever lab you were on. But what happened to me and Adrian, I see yours expired as well, so we may have a bigger issue here that with instruct that we'll have to look into. Okay, Carlos, you were in the building the policy. Okay, we're definitely going to have to look into that. If anyone here had theirs kind of expire and reset, again, if it's after some period of inactivity, 15, 30 minutes, I don't know exactly what the timeout is, that may be on purpose. But what we saw, which I think Carlos and Adrian, you guys are going through as well, is as we were working, it expired. That's not normal. That's not something we want to do. So I'll bring that up with our team and the instruct team and see if we can figure out why that happened. So apologies on that. For those of you who still want to continue, if you've had that issue, go ahead and load it up again, and we can go ahead and skip these. Actually, well, instead of skipping this, I think what I can do is, if you notice, let me go back here. I can go into the overview, and you should be able to do the same thing, and then click lab 5 here and just go directly to it. We don't have to like skip labs one by one. You should be able to go directly to lab number 5. When we do that skip, by the way, it'll have everything set up to lab number 5, which is good so that we could just focus on that one. Now I will have to sign in again. So I'm going to go to my lab credentials page, copy my username. Actually, my username, of course, is different now because it set up a new session for me. Copy my password, sign in. I'll have to do some of those things that we did initially. Like, I think I'll probably have to select my project from the scope selector, which is something we did in lab 1, but now I'll have to do again. But the nice thing is once we're here, like the pipeline, all those other things are done for us. They're being executed for us and so forth. And then we could just continue with where we left off. So I'm going to go back to my project settings. Go to my policies, add my policy. So we call this production approval. I'm going to go to my policy set. So this is what we did before mine got reset over here. So I'm going to kind of run through it quickly. Where I think this is what I did not get to. So after we said that we want to evaluate this on save, we're going to say, which policies do we want to include as part of this policy set? So that production approval and enforce. Actually, I guess we did get to this one. Now it says, let's go back to our pipeline. And we're going to change the environment from our dev environment to production. And it says, oh, if you change it now, you also have to select your infrastructure in that environment. So we've changed it to production. If you remember, the backend one, by the way, is also going to, because we configured the backend to follow whatever the front end is doing. So that's also going to now deploy to production. But if I go to save, now our policy is going to jump in here. And it's going to say, nope, this is not something we could do. That's non-negotiable. You need to have an approval stage for your front end deployment, which is going to a higher environment. Rudy, thanks for the information. Sounds like you ran into the same thing. So I'm going to make a note of that and share that with the team for investigation. So apologies. Hopefully, again, you guys can catch up in the same way that I was showing you how to get back in and skip over the stuff that we've done. Now, to get around this, of course, I say get around, but to actually follow the policy, what we're going to want to do is to do an approval. And we're going to do that by adding a stage before our front end deployment. I'm going to add an approval stage. This can, by the way, be a step within a stage, but we'll just make it its own stage. We'll call it approval. I can have this approval come directly in Harness. It could come from Jira or ServiceNow. It could even be other systems, other ticketing systems, which we call custom over here, but we're going to go ahead and use the Harness one. And that automatically puts an approval step within my stage. Now, the little indicator here says that there's something we haven't configured. And if I go in there, the one piece that's missing is which users are allowed to approve this. We're going to go into our project and say our production approvers group. So you can imagine that there's prod approvers or other folks who we'd want to make sure they're the only folks who can do this approval. And why is this not saving for me? Let's try one more time. Oh, I didn't give it a name. Okay, sorry. That's probably noting that here, but because of the resolution, I wasn't seeing it. Excuse me. And now that I have my approval in here, I meet our policy, I should be able to save and now execute as well. So again, that policy allows our DevOps, SecOps, platform teams, whoever it is, to make sure that those things that are non-negotiable, those things that we must do to meet the standards for our company, for our organization, can be codified and automatically applied. Harness is going to do all of the heavy lift of making sure that's all done so someone can't accidentally skip that and introduce risk into the organization. And in turn, that allows those central teams to potentially open up access to modifying pipelines and things like that to the broader team. So the broader team can be enables, they can have self-service. they can feel empowered to do what's right for their teams and not have to create a ticket, put it on the backlog, wait 3-6 months for someone to respond and get to it, because the poor folks on the platform DevOps teams, they've they've got their plates full already. I'm going to hit my check button. Now, because of timing, I'm going to skip running this. I'm just going to go ahead and hit next and move on into this last challenge or last lab. And this is around our one of our AI features now. Gen AI, of course, is very hot, has been for a number of years, and has been put into the Harness platform, across the platform. We saw a piece of that earlier. We actually added AI. It wasn't Gen AI, but AI into the platform back in I want to say 19. I think there's articles about that in tech magazines from like 2019. And where it was is in using AI to automatically work with your tools, your observability tools, to determine if a deployment is causing risk and needs to potentially be canceled or rolled back. So same thing a lot of folks do in war rooms on Saturday nights, at 2 a.m, whatever, where we do a deployment and we're looking at a bunch of screens to figure out, hey, does that mean something went wrong? Has anyone seen this error before? Harness can automate that. Give you a sanity check and say, nope, we've checked with your observability tools. We know what the patterns look like and everything seems good. Or there's risk here. Do you want to potentially automatically cancel the deployment, roll it back, maybe manually override and say continue on? So that's what we're going to be able to do here. As part of this, one of the first things it says is we're going to go to advanced options on the right, and we're going to enable selective stage execution. What that means is that instead of having to execute everything, we can just say we want to select one stage here and only execute that one. Not something typically you do, but for the purpose of the workshop, we're going to do that. It says go ahead and delete the approval. We're going to go back to the back end deployment. We're going to change our environment from the prod deployment, or from whatever front end said, to, we're going to change that to dev. That means we don't need an approval. So it's okay that we removed that approval. And then we're going to continue on. Now, in the execution tab, remember earlier I said you don't normally just go right from the canary deployment to the delete. This is where we do some sanity checks. There may be some manual touch points in here. There may be some automated touch points. We're going to add that, what we call continuous verification. And there's different techniques that we have for analysis. So knowing what type of deployment you're doing, and it's automatically going to say this, we know this one is canary. So knowing that is going to be important. Having a sensitivity, like are we highly sensitive to deviations? Is this high risk? Or maybe if it's a lower risk application, we have a low sensitivity. How long do we want to check this? We're going to go ahead and put 5 minutes as an example. And that's it. Now, this is automatically tied in, or it has been automatically tied in for us in the background to our observability tools. So when we go ahead and execute this, instead of just deploying the canaries and immediately deleting and doing a full rollout, now we're going to pause in there and we're going to be checking our observability tools to make sure that what we're deploying here is not presenting some risk and that things look good. We can now deploy this to the larger audience. I know that we've come up to time and some people are going to have to drop, which is perfectly fine. Obviously, we all have busy days and things like that. I'm going to leave the rest of this, and again, the rest of this just being running through Lab 6 at the end here, visualizing the canary deployment. You'll actually see that in our demo app over here. So the demo app should have my application that we've deployed, but we don't have the canary yet because that's not been deployed. So when we're in that canary phase and running through our automated verification, that continuous verification for that 5-minute period, if you click check release, you should see the canary here. But I'm going to leave that to you. If you can continue on here for another 5-10 minutes, feel free to do so and get to this endpoint and complete the lab. If not, no worries, totally understand. It ran a little long because of that hiccup. You can, of course, come back to that same link that we shared earlier at some point in the future, skip to lab 6, and be able to continue on and complete this as well. With that, excuse me, I'll pause to see if there's any kind of last minute questions, any last minute help that I could provide anyone. I thank you all for being a great team, great members of our DevOps Days workshop. Everyone's done fantastic. I've again been keeping track in the background with where everyone is. Hopefully this was a valuable experience. I'll stay on for a couple minutes in case anyone needs help. But if not, thanks again for joining and participating in our Dev Days. Hopefully this again was valuable to get our hands-on, your hands-on time with Harness to learn some new things. And we look forward to talking to you in the future. Thanks, Rudy. Thanks, Carlos. Appreciate your interactivity during this session. Thanks, Adrian. So I'll stay on for another minute or two in case anyone has any last minute questions. It could be about the workshop. It could be about Harness in general. It could be general industry topics if you have any questions about that as well. But happy to stay on for another couple of minutes before we go ahead and end this Zoom. All right, it seems like there's no other questions. So once again, I'd like to thank everyone who's still here and has participated and done some amazing things with Harness today. Thanks again, and we will see you soon. Have a great day.